It is such a pleasure to be interviewing Shaheen here, who is a learning and leadership strategist and consultant. I've seen her in action myself, facilitating really inclusive leadership training for people with very diverse backgrounds. So I'm excited to hear her practical tips on building accessible learning and development cultures and how to facilitate when you have people with diverse needs. I guess the second part also is I heard a stat the other day from Deloitte Access Economics saying that Australian businesses are expecting to spend about $8 billion in learning and development in 2024. But I suspect many companies are still spending budgets on traditional training programs. I guess in the backdrop of such a rapidly evolving business landscape, we'll also touch on how we ensure learning programs don't just sit in a silo, but actually contributes to business goals as well. So I'm looking forward to getting stuck into it. Shaheen, welcome.
Thanks, Amanda. So glad to be here. And you're already speaking my language, just already there.
Love it. Can we just start off with telling us a bit about you, your background and your skill set?
I call myself a full stack learning designer, or in informal conversations, a Swiss Army knife of learning design.
Love
So
it.
I've done the whole bit. I have an educational background in learning design and technology, in design thinking, and I've kind of done the whole suite of from strategy and consultation to actually building and designing learning programs, leadership capability programs, all the way to facilitation, building online courses. I'm a coach, I'm a mentor, all of those things. So yeah, kind of done the whole suite. And because I get bored quite easily, I've worked in a variety of different industries. So I've worked in corporate, large multinationals. I've worked in higher education, and I've worked in social impact. So yeah, keeping it all fresh.
I love that background. And Shaheen has also had a little bit of a stint in marketing, I have to say. So has definitely done the gamut, right?
Yes, portfolio career is what we call it, apparently, Amanda. That's the new word I've learned.
That's it. That's it. Now, with your L&D background and your last role being in a disability tech company as well, you have applied a lot of accessible applications to both your facilitation and the creation of your programs. Now, anyone listening in, can you share with us some of your tips and techniques to ensure you really create an inclusive setup?
You're right. Everything that I do, Amanda, has an inclusive lens to it. And I also shy away from thinking about inclusion from a view of what are the diversity buckets. So am I including women? Am I including people with disabilities? That I don't think in that. For me, if we are designing a program that's inclusive for all, it means inclusive for all. So some of the things that I do to make sure I'm catering to the right human being in front of me in my workshop or Zoom call or online course, is I ask the question. So you'll see a lot of times when I send out my calendar invites, at the bottom I'll have, if you know, I want to make sure that this is the best experience you have for every individual. If there's something that I can do to make sure this is happening, please let me know. So people know before they come into the workshop with me that I want to make sure this is inclusive for all. And if they have a need for an accommodation, what would that be? Sharing content beforehand is another one of those similar ideas. There are some people who like to marinate on ideas. There's people with neurodiversity who like to have access to content beforehand. It's just making sure that it is accessible for everybody. So sharing content is a really simple thing that people can do beforehand. So they're not put in the spot. This is especially so when, there's a discussion I want in a workshop, and a lot of my workshops are led by discussion. So instead of saying, okay, I'm going to put a question up on the screen and we're going to go around the room and talk about this. What if I need 3 minutes to myself to think about the question and what my view is? So sharing slides, sharing questions, getting people to know what to expect in the workshop is a really good way to set them up. during the workshop, it's also equally about giving people options. So one of the things that I'll say quite often is if you want to have a chat about this, you can come off mute, or you can put in chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll include you in. So if, again, for instance, somebody is uncomfortable coming on camera or speaking up, they can just put in chat. And then the trick is, when you're having the discussion, you weave what's in the chat as part of the conversation. So it doesn't come off as a side note that you've forgotten if you've put it in chat. If you've put in chat, you're still part of the conversation. And that's on me as a facilitator to make sure I'm doing that right. So yeah, those are some things that I can think off the top of my head.
I think they're really great tips. And it's funny that you sort of say asking the question up front, sharing the content earlier, because quite often facilitators don't want to share things until they're actually in the session. And I like your approach because it makes people potentially less anxious, and it
Yes.
does get them to prepare a little bit more for the sessions as well. Can I ask you something a little bit more pointed and a bit more specific? Are there any specific examples of accommodations that you've had to make, that you've had to really accommodate for?
Oh, there's so many of these, Amanda. So in my last organization where I worked with lots of people who identified as neurodiverse, this was a whole new arena I was walking into and made a bunch of mistakes, but learned very quickly, and I'm so grateful for everybody who took out time to talk to me about this. Um, I was talking about this only a few days ago. There was one particular workshop that I remember walking in, and the problem with a lot of best practices in L&D and facilitation is they don't work for neurodiversity, they don't work for different thinking styles, they don't work for different brains. And so a lot of things that I had been taught as being best practice have had to change very quickly on my feet. So this particular workshop that I was talking about, if you looked at the Zoom recording, you'd think nobody in the room was engaged. There was one person who was kind of sitting to the side, throwing a ball. There was one person who had the camera off. And I remember walking into the Zoom workshop and just being like, why am I here? Like, nobody wants to be here. Kind of plodded along. And then it was only at the end of the workshop that I was told, this is a bunch of neurodiverse people. And so for me, this is engagement. I'm looking at you in your eyes and having a conversation. That's too much sensory overload for some brains. And so I might be looking outside, but I'm listening to you. I'm still engaged, but you don't think I'm engaged. And so it's quite nerve-wracking as a facilitator when you have to do that. And so that I think that was a big learning for me, is to not let my assumptions of what engagement looks like to take to then project that on other people in the workshop. So I think this goes back to the human-centered approach that I was talking about earlier, Amanda. So there's a bunch of questions I ask myself, whether the session needs to be in person or hybrid or remote. So who are the participants in the room? What works best for them? What's the content of the workshop? Is it reflection-based? Is it discussion-based? Do I want to achieve connection? So for instance, if I'm running the start of a 3-month leadership program and it's a cohort, I need connection. And we know through research that best connection happens in person. So that'll need to be an in-person workshop. Is it reflection? So people can do reflection in their own spaces. That need not necessarily be in person. It could be an online. So it's that context of who are the humans in the room? What do they need? And then also, what are the outcomes within the workshop that I want? But then adding to that, like personally, what I love an in-person workshop. I think there's an energy, and I think there's the human connection, which kind of has been a bit harder now to get, post-COVID. But I also have heard from different brains that people work better and feel more comfortable being online. So virtual is my second option. Hybrid is always harder to just logistically, and also from an inclusion point of view, hybrid is always the hardest to work because you're trying to cater to an audience in the room, plus also people on Zoom or whoever is like on a big screen behind you. People on the big screen behind you cannot see the faces of the people in the room. They're tiny dots in a big boardroom, that sort of stuff. So it's always hard doing hybrid from an inclusion point of view. People are worried about talking over each other, and Zoom fatigue is real. Again, I think Harvard has done a big piece of research around Zoom fatigue and how real it is and what are the reasons for it. So there's a bunch of stuff in there, but always going back to the design center, human center design thinking to be like, who are the people, what's the outcome I want to achieve, and therefore what might be the best way to run it.
Fantastic. So you touched on human-centered design thinking. Can you just walk through what that is and then how leaders might be able to apply it when managing their teams?
Yeah, so design thinking has been around for a couple of decades now. It's a structured thinking process, is how I think about it, and it's at the core of a lot of the work that I do. I think of it as a circle that reiterates itself. So you always start with the discovery, and this is my favorite section to be in. I think as designers and as practitioners, we don't spend enough time in discovery, but the discovery phase is all about knowing your people. So who are you designing for? Who are they? What do they do? What's their journey like? What's their daily life like? But then also the outcomes. What are the outcomes you want to achieve from this program? The why of you doing things. So what's the problem I'm trying to solve? And I think it's really key, and I'll point this out. For me, that what's the problem I'm trying to solve is at the core of design thinking. And often it requires peeling back a few layers. And I see this in learning all the time, where somebody comes to me and says, we need to solve the problem of communication in my team. And then I'll be like, how does communication show up as a problem? What's the problems you're facing? How does this turn up within your team meetings? You pull back a few layers and sometimes you go like, well, it's not a communication problem, it's a psychological safety problem. So sitting in the problem space, the longer you do that, the better you're designing for the right problems to be solved. So that's the discovery phase. Once you've done a fair bit of understanding your people, consultations, data, wherever you're getting your information from, you then start to think about what's the problem you're trying to solve. And generally, this is where you boil down the essence of your discovery phase into a how might we question. How might we improve communication styles? How might we improve communication skills within this team? How might we improve psychological safety? So that's the define phase, and then you go into design. So both the discovery and the design phases are really focused on the human. And this is where the human-centeredness of the design thinking comes into play. So again, I'm designing for these people, are they in the room with me? So I know I'm designing for the right audience. So you can't design for people who are not there and who've not had a say. So thinking about solutions to the how might we problem that we've designed, building a prototype, taking it to market, and then reiterate. So that's the circular model. You always prototype, reiterate. And sometimes, like, it's not always a neat circle, right? Sometimes you have to go back to discovery and you go like, oops, actually, in the design stage, you realized we didn't ask this really important question, or we didn't speak to this cohort of people we should have spoken to, and so I have to go back to discovery. So, but it's a great way of thinking, and that's what I like. I like structured thinking. I like to use frameworks and tools because we all have certain biases, and mental models are the best way to get over that. So I try and remove all bias that I can from my thinking by using structured thinking tools, and design thinking is one of them.
Yeah.
I think that's some context for design thinking. How leaders can use that is, start to put leadership as a layer on top of design thinking. So in the discovery phase, do you know what your team actually does? Do you know what a day in their life looks like? that will help you really solve some of the problems that they might have spoken or not spoken about. So sometimes people might say, I don't have time, but it's really that it's not that they don't have time. It's just that they have all of this admin stuff that's coming that way that if you knew about, you might be able to remove as a problem. So that's one way you can think about that in the discovery phase. So know your problem, know your people, know what their journey is like. Another way to think about the discovery and design phases is to understand your people in terms of capability. So what are the skills the job needs from them? Where are they in that spectrum of skills, knowledge, capability, and trying to help them through building their skills. Again, not possible unless you know what they're lacking or what the job needs. So that might be a way of thinking about leadership. Coaching is another really great way of integrating design thinking into your coaching methodologies. So again, asking questions to help you yourself to think about your teams in terms of, okay, what's the problem you're trying to solve? How can I help you on this problem and guide them on a journey using coaching methodologies along with the design thinking framework?
That's a really helpful guidance, I think. And I also wonder, when you're going through the discovery phase, what is the best way to get the right insights?
I love using the five whys as a tool. Yeah, it sounds like you've heard of it. It's keep asking why for every answer that you get. So I'll demonstrate this with an example. Let's go back to the same communication example we talked about. So my team needs communication skills. Why do you need communication skills? Because I feel like there's a disconnect between my people, between two members of my team. Why do you think there's a disconnect? One person says something, the other person doesn't understand it, or well, maybe they ignore it. Why do you think they ignore it? Psychological safety. Might not have been the most refined example, but that's what I could come up on my
Oh, that's
feed.
great.
So the idea is you keep asking why until you get to the root of the problem, and don't take the first problem that's in your face as the most as being the correct one. So that's a tool I use quite often to dig deeper.
Love it. Now, you've got a workshop that you run around managing emotions in the workplace as well. Can you just talk through what that is and what tips people might be able to take away?
Yeah, so I read a piece of research from Yale Foundation, and they've come up with this great research on how to manage emotions. There's a lot in the workshop, but I'll give you some of my top tips. The first thing, as with everything, is to be self-aware of the emotions you're going through. And I think we live in this world where it's not really okay to sit with your emotions, much as discomfort, as you were talking about. So my first invitation to people in the workshop is to sit with your emotion, feel the emotion that you're feeling, and then name the emotion. So there's been research done around name it to tame it. So instead of just being like, I'm not having a great day, what are you feeling? Is it anxiety? Is it confusion? Is it overwhelm? What is the emotion that you're feeling? And there's so many beautiful emotions that we've, I think, stopped talking about. There's intrigue, there's awe. Like, when was the last time we talked about being in awe of something? So I really encourage people to sit with the emotion, feel it, and then name it. Because research shows that when you name an emotion, it helps, it loses power over you. So if I say, I'm feeling really overwhelmed, and then the second stage to that is, why might I be feeling it? Sometimes you get to like the middle of the day and you're just like, this whole day has just been terrible. I don't know what happened. But then if you sit with it, you go like, well, actually, I'm feeling overwhelmed because as soon as I woke up in the morning, this happened. And that's led me to 6 hours later feeling how I'm feeling. So just that knowledge of how you're feeling and why you're feeling it is a great, it already helps to start dissipate some of that emotion. Now, once you've done that, then there's, we talk about some of the thought strategies and some of the action strategies you can take to start to feel better again. Again, there's a bunch of these that we talk about. My favorite one is reframing. So reframing the emotion that you're feeling as something that's stress driven to, well, maybe it's just telling me something about myself. Maybe because I'm feeling overwhelmed because of that one thing that happened that generally I don't feel overwhelmed about. Maybe it's telling me that my cup's not full, and it's an indication that I need to do something about this. Or there's this niggling thought that keeps coming back to me. I need to reframe that as it's telling me something about an action I need to take. Why do I still keep thinking about it? So reframing your negative emotions as what's it trying to tell me, but is it really a bad thing? All of those things. So that's reframing. That's a thought strategy we talk about. So yeah, I love that workshop because I think as saying we're often on the treadmill and we don't stop and think. And what this workshop does is it gives you the space and the permission to pause, think, and then actually gives you strategies that you can personally build for what works best for you. And you can walk away with a list of these other things I'll do. I'll identify my emotions, and these might be some ways I can work through my emotions.
Wonderful. I think that sounds like a really practical workshop that you're running, Shaheen, and you've taken some theory and obviously put your own spin on it as well. And I think having lots of experience in L&D and a variety of different businesses, you've seen a lot, right? And so I think that overwhelm, whether it's overwhelm, disengagement, whatever that looks like, it's such a coaching technique to name and sort of reframe. So I love how you're thinking that way. I wonder what else in your toolkit can you support our Dear Thrive community with? What are some of the skills that you've acquired that you can apply to support our members?
So there's a lot of the advice and coaching, so as we've been talking about in terms of anything that's people related. So whether it's building programs, leadership capability, D&I, mental well-being. I've worked across the organization on a lot of those initiatives. So it's the design and delivery of those workshops. But I think my real strength lies in kind of the human-centered design thinking. So focusing on the human, but then also taking a step back and looking at a systems view of it. So how is it that we can design something that is human-centered, but also ties in with the business goals. It also ties in with the social purpose. And what's the environment and the structures you need around it to make sure that the program that we've designed really thrives. Often what happens is we expect a 90-minute workshop to change things. It doesn't. So really focusing on what's the problem you're solving, what might be the business goal that we're trying to achieve, and then designing something that's sustainable because we've built the right environment for that program to thrive in.
Wonderful. And I think with your human-centered design thinking, that matching of figuring out what the real problem is and matching that to what is actually happening in your organization that you can help one-on-one or even teams figure that out and work out a sort of sustainable and actionable solution. Now, my last question to you is, what does thriving in work life mean to you?
Ah, such a great question. Um, I love variety. So
Mm.
I love having like 5 different projects on my plate where each of them is making me think at 1,000 miles an hour. Um, that's thriving for me. But then also having the right space for me to be able to pause and reflect and do deep work along with doing really creative, innovative work. So that's thriving for me where I can be myself, I can have fun, I'm trusted and I feel like I belong, but at the same time do great work that's innovative and creative, all in the same life.
You sound a little bit like me, restless, wanting to make a difference, wanting to try new things. I'm certainly hearing you. It's been such a pleasure to speak to you, Shaheen. Thank you for all of your great tips. I think there's a lot of awesome takeaways here. And for our thrivers on the platform, Shaheen is available and is one of our advisors here and can offer a lot of support to you and your teams as you grow and find challenges in your business.
Thanks for having me, Amanda. This has been fun.